22nd, which is the candlelit service. Invite your friends, invite the community. Maybe we'll ring the bells this year.
Oh, do it. Because you love that.
We missed it last year. We have another chance. Good to go? Okay, we are good to go. Adina read the scripture and a short reading for the candle. And we sang Advent songs. Come thou long expected Jesus, O come Emmanuel. It's Advent. It's the beginning of the Christmas season in the church calendar. It's a time of preparation. Most likely, most of you are already preparing for Christmas. How soon, anybody, any opinions here, how soon is too soon to start listening to Christmas carols in your house? Never.
It has to be the day after Remembrance Day.
Has to be the day after Remembrance Day. Okay. How about how soon is it too soon to start shopping? When do you start shopping for Christmas presents? Depends how many grandchildren you have. I mean, it's been known to happen that you shop for Christmas presents really, really early, and then you can't stand keeping them in your closet, so you give them to your kids early. Then you have to shop again. Could happen. How soon do you get ready for Christmas? Shopping, checking lists, making sure you've got the groceries, making sure you've got an extra bag of sugar because there's a strike going on or something going on. And, you know, you can't have Christmas without what? Pepper nuts. Okay, I thought you just said nuts. You know, they were saying here that you can't bring anything with nuts to the ladies' thing. And I was thinking, that rule's Shelby out. The other church I pastored one time, they put up a sign in the kitchen, this is a nut-free zone. So I put the sign up on the screen the next Sunday and I said, they're trying to get rid of me. Some of you probably think about Christmas for a long time. It's there. What are we going to do for shopping? What are we going to do for this, that, or the other thing? And it gets closer, and here I'm showing a little bit of myself. It gets closer and closer, but you've still got other things in your life to fill your time. And all of a sudden you realize, oh boy, it's only a couple of weeks away and I haven't done anything about it yet. I've just been thinking about it. That happens to some of us too. It's called procrastinating. How early did God start preparations for Jesus to come to earth? You've got a date or a number. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, right after Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, God says to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. It's very personal. It's, you know, the woman was going to have lots of offspring, but this is about one in particular. In retrospect, now we look back and say, yep, God was already preparing the way. He was already starting to set things up for when Jesus would come. When the children of Israel left Egypt after their years of slavery and spent time in the desert, there was a time where they were sinning against God, and God sent a plague of snakes among them. And they cried out to Moses, and Moses cried out to God, and God said, make a snake out of bronze or brass, stick it on a pole, and tell the people, if you look at that, then you will live. What in the world is that all about? Except, in retrospect, we look back and we say, yeah, Jesus was put on a cross, and anybody who looks at him in faith doesn't die from sin. The tabernacle they had in the Old Testament, there was a table that had 12 loaves of bread on it all the time, showbread. Well, Jesus came and he said, I am the bread of life. Also in the tabernacle, there was this big candlestick with 7 candles on it, always burning. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. There's so many different ways where God was giving this foreshadowing. I'm sending somebody. It was preparing. So how far ahead of time did Jesus prepare? A long time. But then somewhere along the way, things took on a different note. It's like when we think about Christmas in July and in August and in September. Yeah, it's coming, but we have other things to do. And in October, okay, now in November, okay, now it's time to start doing something about it. It takes on, it's not here yet, but it takes on a different note. So in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah the prophet says, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling in the desert, prepare a way for the Lord. Make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all mankind together will see it. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. It's an amazing, very short collection of words and images. Isaiah was a prophet. To whom did he speak this? Into what world did he speak it? What was he saying? I want to say that it was a message for those who were distressed, and it was a message for those who were weary, and it was a message for those who were in the wilderness. And any of us who are old enough to remember a guy by the name of Martin Luther King Jr., you ever hear his I Have a Dream speech? Anybody ever heard that? This is part of it. I could not possibly pretend to have the power and the emotion and the inflection in it that he did. But it's still, when I read these words, I still hear, my brother had an LP, you know, the big round circle thing that you put on a record player and it would go around. Powerful words. Absolutely powerful words. A message for the distressed. Comfort. Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for. For she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. Comfort for the distressed. Isaiah, to whom did he say this? When did he live? What kind of a world did he speak this into when he says, speak tenderly. Her hard service has been completed, past tense. I'm going to try to sketch a little bit of a picture of the world that he was speaking into, and invite you to compare it a little bit to the world that we're living in as well. Isaiah lived roughly 700 years before Jesus was born. That's a long time to start making preparations. He was speaking to a people for whom comfort was absolutely unimaginable. The nation of Israel had had a civil war. about 200 years before Isaiah came. So for 200 years, this nation had been split into two parts. When we talk about Israel, we're kind of never quite sure. Are we talking about the southern kingdom or the northern kingdom? Technically, Israel means the northern kingdom. But the southern kingdom were also Israelites. So now, in Isaiah's time, during Isaiah's time, the northern 10 tribes had been defeated by the Assyrian Empire, and I'll give a little bit of background to that as well. This northern nation, Israel, by then they had been independent roughly 200 years. Wars, armies, sieges, treaties, alliances, broken promises. That's what their life was like. That's what their world was like. That northern kingdom in their 200 or so years had 21 kings, if my count is right. 8 of whom were either assassinated or committed suicide. An almost unchecked, steady progression into increased idolatry. Some of you remember the story of Ahab. He was king. Jezebel was his queen. At their table, meaning they provided food for, there were 400 prophets of Baal, 450 prophets of Asherah, so 850 prophets who were totally against the God of heaven, whom Ahab, the king of Israel, was feeding and sheltering. Elijah comes along and, besides a lot of other stuff, has this big contest on the mountain where he calls all these prophets, come on, let's have a contest. I've mentioned it before, I'll probably mention it again. And it was a stunning display of God's power. And then Elijah, together with a lot of other people's help, killed all these prophets of Baal. And the people all said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Did that make a real difference in the course of the nation of Israel? Not much. It was maybe a little blip back up, but for the most part, Israel was a steady decline into idolatry. Parents sacrificing their own children into the fire. So then during Isaiah's lifetime, there was a king in Judah whose name was Ahaz. Hezekiah and Manasseh were also kings during Isaiah's time, but Ahaz, well, Israel, the northern kingdom, their brothers, got together with another country and they were going to come and attack Judah. And Ahaz, the king of Judah, who's supposed to believe in God, he sends a message to Assyria. He says, hey guys, we're in trouble. Could you come and give us some help? And he went into the temple of God, ransacked it, and took these golden things that were part of the worship of the true God of heaven and sent them all to the king of Assyria as a gift so that the king would bring his army and beat up these other two nations who, okay, this is Judah, this isn't Israel. And they were saying, actually, making a treaty with Assyria is more important than worship with God. Anyway, Assyria came, and they did smack those other two nations around enough so that they quit attacking Judah. And then about 12 years later, Assyria said, hey, you know, that northern kingdom, Israel there, I think they're a ripe plum for the picking. And they went and wiped them out. So during Isaiah's time, the northern kingdom ceased to exist. Not only did they win the war, they transported the people from the northern tribes into a lot of different parts of the Assyrian Empire and transported a lot of other people back into that northern kingdom. So now it was not a Jewish people anymore. Later on, they came to be called Samaritans. That's a little bit of an example of what that world looked like. Into that society, into that world, Isaiah says, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed. It was a message for those who needed comfort, for those who were distressed. It was preparing them for something that was yet to come. It was also a message of rest for the weary. They needed to hear this. They needed to hear God say, your hard service has been completed. Your sin has been paid for. She has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. But it sure didn't feel like it. But they were tired of struggling to do the right thing in a world that seems to have gone crazy, tired of being afraid of what the future might bring, just tired of it all. That's the time of Isaiah. And quite frankly, that's our time too. We still live there. News reports of war and peace treaties that have come to an end and things that don't make any sense, and killings and murders in our own cities that, why do they happen? It happened then, it happens now. But God sent a man to say, comfort. Comfort is coming. There is an end in sight. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been, don't lose heart. A voice of one calling in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord. Don't lose heart. And Isaiah was just one of the messengers that God sent hundreds of years in advance to prepare the people for the coming of Jesus, the Messiah. Adina lit the candle. We're calling it the prophet's candle. It's the candle of reminding us that the prophets came to tell the people somebody is coming. Don't lose heart. I wonder sometimes, why did God do it like 700 years in advance? Like, come on. The people look in their world, and they look on all the news feeds, and they look on Facebook, and they say, it sure hasn't made any difference yet. But he needed to remind them, he wanted to remind them that he hadn't forgotten. Sometimes we need to be reminded that God hasn't forgotten us either. Because some people live in situations, whether it's something others know about or totally private, but situations that you wonder, is this ever going to end? Is there ever going to be peace or relief or rest or something? God says it's coming. Don't forget. Don't lose heart. So for those in distress, for those who are weary, and for those in the wilderness, a voice of one calling in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God. Are these words literal or figurative? That's one of the interesting things about biblical prophecy. It's almost always more than just one of those. Isaiah's time, the society was in a wilderness. As I've already said, the international military things were messed up badly. But for them as a society themselves, it was a time of dryness and barrenness. There was no clear direction for anybody, probably much more so than even now for us. The rich were exploiting the poor, the crooked were ripping off whomever they could. society was like a wilderness. So in that sense, it was figurative. The message, Isaiah's message, was spoken into a wilderness. Verse 4, every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low, the rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain. A wilderness. Society in a wilderness. Then, some 700 years after Isaiah spoke this, there's a guy by the name of John the Baptist who shows up. And Mark says in chapter 1, verse, we'll start in verse 1, Mark 1, verse 1. The beginning of the gospel about Jesus Christ, the Son of God. It is written in Isaiah the prophet, I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way, a voice of one calling in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight paths for him. And then Mark continues and says, and so John came, baptizing in the desert region and preaching a baptism of repentance. John came literally out of the wilderness to preach his message. But he also preached into a wilderness that was society's wilderness. God didn't send his message through Isaiah or through Jesus or through John the Baptist or the other prophets in the Old Testament. He didn't send his message, his good news, into a world that was full of good people. Jesus himself even said, I didn't come for the good people. I came for those who need help. The good news came and still comes for a world living in a wilderness of inequality and injustice. God sent messengers. He sent prophets, prophet's candle. He sent messengers to remind the people that he hadn't forgotten, that he was still coming. He would send someone. Those who were willing to listen could hear it. It certainly wasn't always understood properly. But God continued to remind the people that he hadn't forgotten them. Sometimes you feel like God's forgotten you. Sometimes you feel, and I feel, like it sure looks like this world is absolutely devoid of God's presence. But he hasn't forgotten. He sent Isaiah to tell the people that God would send someone who would bring comfort and rest and lead them out of their wilderness. And then Jesus came, and he came exactly as predicted, except because of the prophecies, and sometimes they can be understood this way and that way. People didn't recognize him for who he was. They were still looking for somebody who would do it differently. And quite frankly, I think when we think about the second coming, when Jesus comes, some of that will still be true. We have voices who tell us they know exactly how it's all going to happen, and there will still be some surprises. But God has not forgotten. He hasn't forgotten you in your situation. He hasn't forgotten this world that we live in where people pretend that God doesn't exist anymore. Isaiah reminded the people that God had not forgotten them. As we prepare for Christmas, may we also be reminded that God has not forgotten us. Comfort. Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. a voice of one calling in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all mankind together will see it. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken.